Chapter 3. Do you have a screw loose? As David drove home after the day's events, his mind was racing and he was thinking about several different things. Ashley, of course, was rooted in his thoughts, but he was also thinking a lot about what he did at the noon bell. How will that be a problem? He kept internally saying to himself. It's just one less than normal, not much of a difference anyways. He kept telling himself, hell, this way I'm saving money anyways, right? But he knew even just thinking like that was already showing just how different things were becoming. Dave, would you like me to add a stop to the nearest hardware store so you can collect the fusion core needed for the lawnmower's recharge? The car's AI asked. You made a note in your phone to remind yourself, but based off my readings, you have not yet reviewed your phone's notes since this morning. David snapped out of his thoughts at the car's comments. Yeah, sure, that's a good idea. Let's go to a hardware store, and please make a note in your system to call me David. I do not like being called Dave, David said, feeling a change in his mind from worried to somewhat annoyed. I have told this damn car not to call me Dave nearly every day for the last 2 years already. He thought, how smart is the machine if it can't even remember that simple instruction, for goodness sakes? The car readjusted its route to a hardware store, and in 5 minutes, it was parked in a massive parking lot. We have arrived at Handy Depot, Dave, the car said. David took his hand off the auto drive sensor and pressed the off button. As he stepped out of the car, he began walking to the doors. He also began to take stock of the people around him, all smiles and properness. The perfect images of being balanced perfectly. These people are nothing like Ashley, he thought as he made his way through the doors. He walked straight to the aisle where the cores were. He knew the spot well since he never fancied himself a handyman type, and really only ever came around to get the cores for the mower. As he grabbed the $40 fusion core and made his way back to the front of the store to check out, he could hear the news on the store's speakers. Chem Farm's newest answer to all you and your wives' needs. The newswoman said in a voice that screamed it was reading a script. Fertility Plus for Men is the newest answer to help address the growing concerns of families who are struggling with having children. This new drug is to be followed up with Fertility Plus for Women, which should help women in greater numbers begin to feel the desire to well mate with their significant others. The news anchor chuckles with an air of artificialness in her laugh. But for now, it's the men's turn, as the drug will start nationwide distribution next week and a worldwide release being slated for next year. David smirks at the fact that this was in some way newsworthy information to be heard, and then even let out a little chuckle as he approached the checkout line, as he thought of someone like Matthew and his growing stomach taking this new drug and flopping on top of Mary to produce another Daisy. Then Matthew and Mary will have 2 kids on the verge of being sent to be re-educated. As he thought of this picture playing out, David didn't realize the smile that was occupying his face as he was brought up next in line. The man behind the checkout lane saw David's face and grinned back at him. There's always something about seeing a smile in Handy Depot to let us know we are giving our customers satisfaction in every purchase, the man bellowed, and David realized that he was talking about him. Well, David started, this place always seems to have the answer for all my needs, as well as my wives, David said as he began laughing at himself. It was a crappy joke, but the fact that he made it and didn't filter it through his mind, as well as the fact that the man ringing him up not understanding, made it all the funnier. The man's smile dropped just a small amount, and he simply nodded at David, finished ringing him up with no further conversation. The silence made David even happier. As he strolled out of the store, he couldn't help but take a long, hard, deep breath of air. It almost felt as great as he was hoping it would, but he sensed static electricity as he took that breath. It was almost as if the air was in a constant state of being charged up, like when you rub your feet against carpet and create that small little current. David doesn't let it affect his mood too much, and presses the fingerprint lock on his car and starts it back up to head home. Once home, he makes a dash for the door to avoid Steve in case he was waiting for David to come home and bug him more about this lawn situation. As he enters his apartment, he looks around to take stock of his current living conditions. After thinking about how this apartment makes him look boring, he goes about his usual routines. A conditioning exercise followed by some chain smoking on his back patio, then moving along to a simple ham sandwich dinner and shower. As he showers, he recounts his day. He thinks about how, after taking only the 2 pills at noon, he went to the break area and looked for Ashley. She wasn't there, so he sat down at a table alone, hoping she might follow in later and find him. But instead it was Simon and Matthew that found him. And he was forced to sit and listen to them talk about nonsense. He decided at the table that anything they said, he was not going to listen to either. So, it truly stayed nonsense. As the day went on, and Matthew made his rounds in the second half, he spewed more gibberish at David about their work and blah blah blah. It was only after the day ended, and he was walking to his car, he saw her again. "Hey, David," she said coolly as she walked up to his left side. "Hey, Ashley, how was your first day?" he asked, a bit more collected than the last time she met him. But this appearing out of thin air tactic of hers had caught him off guard twice now. She looked him in the eyes. Strangely, it felt like a deeper stare than anyone had ever really done. Most people look at you either not directly or blankly look you in the eyes. But this stare had something almost human in it. Then she smiled at him again, and he felt his stomach get light. "After our encounter this morning, the rest of the day was pretty boring, if I'm being completely honest. You and your desk stunt were the highlight of the day," she said, holding her smile. David returned the smile as best he could and formed a return as he was saying it. "Well, I like to make a worthy first impression, what can I say?" Wow. He impressed himself with that one. Hey, it wasn't ice smooth or anything, but it beat screaming like a frightened child as you fall backwards in a chair. She also seemed to enjoy his response because then she laughed. Like a real laugh at that, not one of those canned laughs you hear every day from everyone and everything. He pretty much melted in it. "Well, this is me," she said as they walked up to her yellow car. "I hope to see you around more often. Maybe this next lunch when I am not filling out orientation forms, I can actually make good on seeing you around the break room tables," she said, letting David know she didn't purposefully not show in the break room. "Yeah, sounds good," David said simply, but with a smile on his face. "Bye, David," Ashley said, as she entered her car, looking at him with that smile on her face. "Yeah, see you around, Ashley," David said almost breathlessly. After she pulled away, he had to look around to locate his car. Sure, enough they walked right past it on the way to her car, and he didn't even realize it. David turned the knob in the shower to turn it off, and began to dry off, still thinking about all the day's events. He also decided he was going to continue to take only 2 pills per dose from now on. He felt fine, and in fact, didn't see any issues with his current behavior. If anything, there was no change whatsoever. The next week went by quickly. David continued to take only 2 pills per dose and continued to converse with Ashley. He was growing very fond of her. Well, he was already fond of her in a physical sense. But he found her voice, the way she spoke and the way she thought to be just as enticing as her appearance. David learned she was 25, 4 years younger than he was. She was exempt from mandatory military service due to her excellent ability to produce highly engaging advertisements from a young age. "It's easy, really," she said one day. "All I did was look at old commercials and determine the typical phrases and buzzwords that are used in relation to what scene is being shown to the viewer. Then, all I had to do was apply them to new products." Because of her ability to crack the secret code to getting people to buy things, she got sent straight to college in that field, where she found her studies to be dull in comparison to the actual work. They tell you all the things they think work, but really the only class I took that I felt I could learn from was advertisement history. I got way more access to what worked in the past and what didn't than ever before. She once told him while they stood outside the building one morning as David smoked. She wasn't a fan of David smoking, but she said everyone has a vice, and at least with Clinic, it's not as lethal. Once done with school, she got courted by multiple major companies looking for the cream of the advertisement crop. She landed with Synth Eats for the money. And within 3 years, she had amassed enough money to begin looking for a job that offered a less restrictive schedule, and she could take time to focus more on personal life things. "We spend all our hours working. We will never be able to play," she once said with a smile that made David feel like there was more to the word playing than the childlike definition. As the second week of his new self-prescribed 2-pill dosage of Chembal started, Ashley and David began to take the friendship from the standard office acquaintance to outside the office. It started when David saw an opportunity and took the opening. While walking to their cars that Wednesday, Ashley had made mention about how she was buying a new treadmill after her old one finally fell apart. I am not looking forward to trying to bring it to my apartment. I think I'll just use the delivery service they offer," she said somewhat in passing. "Sure, you can spend the extra 80 or 100 bucks," David started, somewhat nervous about what he was about to say but staying as calm as he could. "Or I can just help you when you get it," he said, with a somewhat indifferent look on his face. He was hoping to look convincing. She looked at him. Her face showed the shock that she was feeling. He knew this part was the risky part. He was pretty sure they had been flirting these past few weeks, but he was also aware of the issues this might cause. It was very taboo to start an office romance, although they did happen, but it was not considered professionally viable for one's career. He even made a point to tell Simon and Matthew, when they began noticing how much time he spent with her, that he was really interested in advertising. "Are you really offering to come and help me collect the treadmill and bring it to my apartment?" she asked somewhat coldly, making David even more nervous that this may just go from bad to very bad, very quickly. He shrugged, hoping to help play it off in case that's the way it was heading. "Sure. I mean, if you are trying to save a few bucks is all. Otherwise, Before he could finish the sentence, Ashley pulled out her phone and started to unlock it. "If you're going to help me with this thing, we will need each other's numbers, David." She said David had not expected this response, even though it was the outcome he was hoping for. A wash of adrenaline and nerves began to filter through his mind. Yeah, you're right. What was I thinking?" He laughed as she looked up from her phone with her green hazel eyes wide with excitement and anticipation. He couldn't think of a time he saw her with that look in her eyes. They quickly exchanged numbers. "Okay, David. I'll text or call you tomorrow morning to go grab this thing, deal?" "Deal," David replied. As she drove away and David made his way to his car, he started to realize the last 2 weeks had been more fun than any other time he could remember in his life. And he didn't want the good times to end. He hoped it could just keep going on like this. Sure, there were some issues. Since he had lowered his Chembal intake, he noticed how much he hated the colors of his apartment. He considered painting the walls different colors, but it was not allowed on his lease. He mowed the grass finally, but only after Steve and his bug-eyed wife came and knocked on the door about it. He also found that besides older movies and his exercises, he really didn't care for much of anything the world was selling. But all that considered, he was still having a great time. Everything seemed to taste a little better, and colors seemed to pop just a little bit more. Ashley was always fun. He was surprised she seemed so much like him since he self-lowered his Chembal amount. It was around 9:30 a.m. when Ashley called David the next morning. "Hey, yeah, how's your morning starting out?" she asked him. "Pretty good," he said. He was only just now waking up. This was the second weekend where he was taking his slightly lower dose of Chembal, and he found that he liked sleeping in. "Well, do you think you could get to my place in the next 30 minutes to go get this treadmill?" she asked him. "Yeah, of course. Just text me the address, and I will start over that way as soon as I get it," he said, yawning a little and smelling his morning breath, noting to himself that first he had to brush his teeth before anything else. "Okay," she exclaimed. "I'll send it now. See ya." She hung up, and sure enough, nearly as soon as the call ended, she had sent over her address, and David bounced out of bed to brush his teeth and put on some clothes. As he walked out the front door to head towards the car, he saw Steve, his wife, and their child in the front yard. The child was playing with a sprinkler, jumping back and forth over the water. Steve was starting up his mower. The usual timeline they had agreed on was every other week, and this was meant for David to know that he also needed to be ready to break his mower, to cut his half. He made a note in his mind to try and get to that either this afternoon or tomorrow morning. But as of right now, he had a bigger item on his daily docket. He was off to help Ashley at her apartment. It would be the first time besides the phone call they just had where he would be talking to her off the clock. He realized he was excited, and this helped wake him up even more. As he hopped in the car and pressed the button to start it up, the car roared to life. He punched in the address Ashley had sent for the car to start heading towards. "Good morning, Dave. I see we are heading to a new address today. Would you like me to save this in my system with a name for possible future visits?" No, not right now. Maybe if I found myself visiting again. As I have stated previously, my name is David, not Dave," David said, this time almost with a slight growl in his voice. The car made its usual apologies, and assured it would store this note in its files and headed off to Ashley's home. When David arrived, he parked on the side of the road and got out of the car quickly. As he began to approach the door, he took stock of the area. Ashley lived in a neighborhood like that of David's. Only it was a slightly more expensive section of apartments. No doubt something she was able to afford from her time with Synth Eats. As he reached the front door, he noticed a small flower painted on the door and found it odd, as typically that is not something you are allowed to do when in a lease with the people who own these properties. Before he was able to ring a bell or knock, Ashley opened the door. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was wearing a shirt with some older musical group and jeans that looked slightly faded, like they were meant for working in. She had her usual intoxicating smile on her face when she saw him at the door. "Hey, you made it," she said with delight in her voice. "Well, with the magic of auto-sensor driving brought to you by Census Tech's Smart Car 5, you'll find every ride is the safest one you'll take yet," David said. He was mocking the old ad from which his version of Smart Car was advertised with. Her bright green hazel eyes lit up with the rest of her face as she laughed at his little joke. Her amusement provoked a large smile to cross David's face as well. She stepped out of the apartment and walked past David, heading towards her car, with that same light bright smile of hers. As she walked past him, he noticed she smelt like some fancy, exhilarating perfume. It was an enticing smell, but David couldn't really pinpoint what the smell was supposed to resemble. He just knew it smelt good, and he imagined this intoxicating scent was enhanced by her natural chemistry. That's when he realized, not only did he not put anything other than deodorant on, but that he didn't own anything like a cologne to put on in the first place. For some reason, he felt slightly embarrassed about that. "Come on, we will take my car," she said, walking towards the yellow smart car. He followed her almost instinctively with no questions asked. He was thrilled about the idea that they would be sharing a car ride together, even if this ride ended with him doing a lot of heavy, awkward lifting. As he got in the passenger seat of the car, he noted that the car was the second newest model from Census Tech, a smart car, 6+, and was shocked at how she had such a nice car at such a young age. "Nice model," he said. "I assume advertisements work for Synth Eats must have really paid much better than I thought when you mentioned it." He continued. "It pays to know what people will pay for, or at least to make them think they want to pay for," she said with a smile and over-the-top wink. David was stunned to say the least. It had been nearly 2 weeks since he dropped his Chembal intake and he couldn't be sure, but it just seemed like everything had more flavor in the world than he thought. He cared about more and listened more to everything around him in ways he didn't quite understand, yet also did understand at the same time. "I knew she was different when I first saw her," David thought to himself, "but for some reason, everything about her is different. I can't get enough just simply looking and listening to her." Ashley pressed the start button, and the car came to life, more silently than David's Smart Car 5 would. The AI greeted Ashley and welcomed the new passenger, which Ashley noted to the car was David, and to file that name based off his profile. "There's camera and sensor tech in the car to help identify those who are in it, and can better personalize the ride," she explained to him. "Wow, that's a pretty nice feature. Will it call me Dave?" David asked. She looked at him puzzled for a moment. "Do you want to be called Dave?" she asked in a long, drawn-out fashion, wondering if that was his way of telling her to call him Dave. "No, it's just David, but my car can't take the hint." They arrived 20 minutes later at the sporting goods store and parked in the back of the lot. They didn't have much of a choice in that matter, however. The place was shockingly packed. "This happened the last time I came here for my first treadmill 4 years ago," Ashley muttered with a hint of frustration. Suddenly, out of nowhere, an image from one of the documents he encountered at work some years past flashed in his head, and without realizing what he was doing, David said, "Certain devices should be given shelf lives to ensure consumers will return and purchase the updated models. Certain features should also be left out and released on a backdrop of its development to ensure the newest models retains attraction." She looked at him, with her perfect eyebrow raised in a questioning fashion. "Come up with that one off the top of your head?" she asked. No. It's just something I remember seeing when I first started with the Fed. It was a memo sent from one of the major developers for some kind of product. They were notifying the government about a long-term yield plan to retain consumers," David stated. Then he leaned into the thought harder, though it caused some slight ringing in his head. In fact, I bet every company does that. Think about it. They need us to buy the next phone or next TV, or in your case, and all these people today, new exercise equipment. David grinned, shocked he had the thought, but also now dealing with just the slightest headache from it. Ashley smiled big at David, clearly holding back a laugh. "Something tells me you haven't had a vacation in a while, huh, David?" she asked. They got out of the car, Ashley still giggling about David's comment, and headed for the entrance. Once inside, the wave of cool, automated air conditioning hit them, and the swarms of people were moving around quickly looking for this and that. The music being played was an upbeat, slightly fast-paced electronic song, one where, if there were lyrics, David would not hear them. Ashley, knowing what she wanted and where it was located, headed for the cardio section with David in tow. He watched the people around him as he walked through the store, feeling just a tad bit out of place. He wasn't sure why. After all, he spent large portions of his afternoons exercising and staying in solid shape. So why did he feel like a fish that was ripped from a saltwater tank and thrown into a freshwater tank all of a sudden? If Ashley was feeling the same way, she didn't show it. Walking with the beat of the music, David watched her body move. Most people wouldn't even consider if the person with them would be staring at them the way he was looking at her. But something about Ashley made David think she knew, and she wanted him too. A sudden sharp turn down a left lane, and then she was in the treadmill section of the store. The task of bringing it to the front for checkout and to the car was a job mostly left for David. Ashley helped some to her credit, but she was smaller in frame than David by a lot, and really was only good for helping keep it off the ground so he could stumble forward with the heavy blocky box full of the treadmill parts requiring assembly. After getting the car, the trick of setting the machine on top of the car relied on David having to literally use his back, as Ashley guided it up enough for him to then get it the rest of the way on the roof. They strapped the box to the roof and got in the car. "Now all we have to do is the easy walk from the car to the living room of my apartment and set it up," Ashley proclaimed. "I have a TV in there too. I typically put on some music when I'm on the treadmill. But I do have a few shows or movies in my cloud if you want to have something playing besides music while we put this together." The mention of this sent a shiver down David's spine. The original plan never involved him helping put the machine together. This would add a lot of extra time to their plans, and that meant more time with Ashley. "Sure," David said, most likely looking and sounding as nervous and shocked as he felt. "I like movies a ton, actually." Ashley snickered at him. "I swear, David, sometimes you go from super professional to sounding like a teen that hasn't popped Chembal that morning," she jested. As soon as Ashley said that, both David's and Ashley's smartwatches, phones, and Ashley's car let out a beeping alarm sound. It was noon, the time that everyone who takes Chembal was recommended to take their second dose of the day. As they both reached for their bottles, David grabbed the usual 2 he had been taking. He looked over at Ashley and noticed she popped 1 pill from the bottle and then closed it. "You only have to take 1 pill?" David asked, shocked. "I don't think I've ever seen someone only have to take just 1. He mused. She looked at him with that ever-winning, room-lighting smile. "Well, I may only take 1, but I was prescribed 2 per setting." David was floored. She was doing the same thing he had been, just with smaller numbers. I know. It's reckless, I get it. But I don't think it's harming anyone. And I still go to my regular checkups and make sure I refill on the right time frame. Everything just seems a little lighter when I only take the 1. She looked at the 2 pills in David's hand. "Maybe you should try it and see what I mean. I may be unbalanced more so than what is completely recommended. But without that, I wouldn't have gotten where I did with Synth Eats. Who knows, David? Maybe things will change for you if you take 1 less." He almost wanted to admit that he was already taking 1 less. But before the words came out of his mouth, he stopped himself. If he told her he was prescribed 3 pills per dose, what would she think of him? His mind raced back to the memory of his mother crying in the doctor's office the day the doctor told her he may be on 4 to 5 pills by age 30. He remembered how, because of that instance, coupled with the absence of any real meaningful memories of his father, and his infatuation with Ashley, he impulsively started to take 1 less each dose. He knew, based off the feelings he felt back when he was 16, he was going to match the doctor's prediction and be upped to 4 pills in a setting. That feeling, combined with the strange brewery of these old and new memories, shattered something in the back of his mind that day. The indifference and impassive attitude he had developed caved in on itself, and he wanted to prove something. He wasn't sure at the time, or even now, what he was trying to prove, but he knew he had to. David stared at his hand, and back at Ashley, who was looking at him to see if he was going to react negatively about the revelation. She just dropped on him. And with a smile, David popped a pill back into the bottle, and while putting just the one pill in his mouth said, "Bottoms up."